Ready when you are.
Jewelry, continuity, diabolical ingenuity. All on this week's unanimous installment of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast with a power-boosted open-ended transmat beam, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, the Brigadier gets dragged away from the world's smallest reunion, while the Third Doctor and Sarah encounter an acrobatic robot whose spandex pants truly emphasise his will. Meanwhile, the Fifth Doctor gets hit by a twinge of cosmic angst on his birthday. Well, that's middle age for you. We take a break from admiring the Harp, the Seal, the Coroner, the Black Scrolls, the Ring, the Tomb, the Mind, and the game of Rassilon, and catch up with the Five Doctors. Hello, John.
Matt. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm all right. Good to be back with you. Good to be back in the I'll Explain Later bunker.
Well, we've been doing this for 9 years now.
Bloody
on
hell.
And off, mostly off. I got to say, I have for a long time been looking forward to this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Really, it's a big one.
It is a big one. And hello, listeners, viewers, by the way. I think, not to get too inside baseball, we did plan... We're talking about the Five Doctors today.
Indeed.
Right? We had planned to talk about this last year as part of... In a special we were going to put out for the 60th anniversary and also the 40th anniversary of the Five Doctors in classic... tried and trusted, I'll explain later style. That didn't happen.
No, we failed.
But I really feel we are managing the full essay deadline crisis here because potential mishaps notwithstanding, this episode will drop on the 22nd of November. So we really are squeaking in on the final day of the 60th anniversary year.
Yep.
So I think we've still done it. Technically, this is our salute to Doctor Who on its 60th. And more importantly, the Five Doctors on its 40th.
I mean, we are really capping off that landmark year. Yeah,
absolutely. This is like the closing ceremony, really, isn't it?
Well, you mean no one watches it? Yes, I suppose it is.
Yeah.
Except, of course, both our listeners
and viewers. We can update this joke now. We can go both our listeners and our viewer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's
absolutely.
It's time. It's time it was updated.
This is the Disney version of that joke.
Yeah.
So Five Doctors, John. Yeah, you're on the stats. When did this go out?
Well, you were discussing, of course, the fact that this is hitting the podcatchers. This edition of I'll Explain Later on the 22nd of November 2024. This went.
If it's not the 22nd of November, you'll know something's gone drastically wrong in the edit. But carry on.
Yes. So indeed. Or the cease and desist letter we finally took notice. But yeah, so the Five Doctors was first broadcast on Chicago PBS station WTTW and other network affiliates on the 23rd of November 1983.
On the anniversary day.
And it struck BBC One 2 days later on the 25th of November 1983. 1983, of course, a vintage year. Both you and I were born that year, so fair to say we weren't watching at the time.
And it's a double precedent because not only did an episode of Doctor Who get its premiere in America a couple of days before it did in the UK, as we'd see again in 1996, but also the Five Doctors went out as part of the Children in Need celebrations in 1983, which again, 10 years later, that tradition would be upheld for Dimensions in Time.
Yeah, so. I dare say a lot more children were in need after they'd seen it. But let's not shoot our bolt like the Raston.
Yeah, of course. John, do you want? Do you want to handle the summary, or shall I?
I wouldn't feel competent to do so, but I will.
Okay.
I will anyway.
Well, this could go either way. There's either a lot of plot or not very much plot to summarise.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to see how you.
Fascinatingly,
what happens in the Five Doctors?
Fascinatingly, that dovetails quite a lot with where I come at this from. So the Doctor, as in the fifth Doctor, Peter Davison, is not quite feeling himself. Because various bits of him are sort of going missing. What bits, you may ask? Well, actually, his former selves.
Great chunks of his past detaching themselves like icebergs.
Indeed. So his former selves are being scooped out of time by a mystery assailant and placed into a rather forbidding environment that looks uncannily like rural Wales. And the fifth Doctor himself eventually turns up there, and they're pondering why they're there and what's going on. And it turns out that there's a mysterious figure in the hierarchy of Gallifrey who is pulling the strings.
Yeah.
And there's skullduggery on the High Council. Which is always great for a kind of pulse-pounding sense of suspension.
The second time that's happened in the 1983 season alone. Bear in mind, you got Arc of Infinity and this.
Yeah, indeed. And so, obviously, the stage is set. They're stuck within the death zone of Gallifrey, which is related to the dark history of Gallifrey's sort of, I suppose, gladiatorial sort of, or their lust for blood sport, that kind of thing. And they have to solve various riddles and work together and all that sort of gubbins and lots of stuff happens as a result. And scooped in as well are some of the Doctor's old foes to sort of, I suppose, spur him on.
Yeah, and you've generally got a cast of, if not hundreds, then certainly tens. I mean, you've got like smattering of old companions, the Master's in there, one Dalek, quite a few Cybermen, a Yeti, Rastamori, a robot. We'll probably come to him in due course.
Yeah. But I think that, obviously it has to be noted that this was clearly, this was the 20th anniversary special. That's why it's a multi-Doctor story.
Yep.
They decided to go that direction. We'd already had the three Doctors, I believe, in the 70s.
Yep, 73.
And then the two Doctors. No, the two Doctors would come later.
Two Doctors a couple of years later, yeah.
So it wasn't exactly, I guess, it wasn't a fully...
This didn't happen all the time.
No. That, indeed, when it comes to the 60th anniversary specials that came out earlier...
last year. They were last year.
Sorry. Yeah, last year. When they those specials... there was a lot of consternation about them not being multi-Doctor, as if that was, set in stone as the tradition. Whereas, I mean, it hasn't happened that much. But anyway, that's a whole other kettle of fish. The point is that this was a big deal that this was happening. Clearly, they didn't manage to get all of the Doctors on board.
No.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well...
I mean, but anyone listening to this probably doesn't need to be told.
We're getting into the nuts and bolts of this here. Let's come at this from the top. John, do you like the Five Doctors?
No, because
okay.
We've settled into a routine where you ask me first, and I want to hear your view first.
Oh, okay.
Because I think that the mechanics of this. I mean, let's get into it. Like Tom Baker did not make himself available.
No.
So they managed to cobble together some archive footage from Sharda, the unfinished story, which filmed late 70s, or parts of it were filmed late 70s. Various attempts to recreate it with pretty decent success in various formats have emerged over the years. But I believe there was industrial action at the time, which meant they couldn't complete the story. So they had some unused footage.
Yeah.
Quite well deployed, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it works.
For what it is, but it's quite well deployed footage. And then, obviously, William Hartnell, the first Doctor, had passed away, so he wasn't available. It would have been pretty gruesome if they tried that. So they recast with a character actor called Richard Hurndall. So there were a few hurdles for the writer Terence Dicks, and Terence Dicks, of course, hadn't written for the show since the 70s.
Yeah. I think State of Decay, the Tom Baker Key to Time
Right.
Sorry, no. No, beginning of the 80s. That's 81, season 18. State
Right.
Decay. Yeah.
But he had, I mean, yeah, okay, so only a couple of years really, but his time with the show was basically
He was
over.
a guest writer.
But he was a guest writer in this run, and it made sense, of course, because he had first joined the show in the second Doctor's
All
era.
right, John, ask me what I think about the Five Doctors, because you're
what I'm
nicking
saying
all
is
my points.
Terrence Dicks, he had first become involved with the show with the second Doctor.
Yes.
And so what you have really, the only three original Doctors who are animated, as in, really there. You've got the second Doctor, the third Doctor, and the fifth Doctor.
Yes.
And by this point, he has written for two of them before. Yeah. So probably a good choice if you wanted to get their voices right, you might think. But did he get their voices right? And does this land overall? Now. Matt, let's turn this over to you.
I mean, might not surprise anyone. I love this. I think it's a combination of. I mean, it's terrific fun. There's nostalgic thrills abound in this, but I also admire it, and I think you've touched on some of the reasons why I admire it. In that it basically pulls off a very difficult trick, and to elaborate on sort of what you were saying about Terrance Dicks, he wasn't the first choice to write this story. It was originally given to Robert Holmes, acclaimed as the greatest writer of classic Doctor Who, and his original treatment for it involves a story called The Six Doctors, which involves a plot where the Cybermen are invading Gallifrey to steal the secret of regeneration, so they could regenerate themselves and become cyber lords. What a terrible idea! I'm glad no writers.
You'd have to be a fool.
You have to be an idiot to take that idea up. Not an idiot. That's a bit mean. But his draft was called The Six Doctors. To explain away the fact that he was worried that obviously William Hartnell had passed away, was going to need to be recast. You'd need to have some sort of explanation for why this guy, being the first Doctor, doesn't look anything like the first Doctor. So he turns out to be an android duplicate made by the Cybermen, etc., etc., etc. And basically, Robert Holmes can't make the logistics of the story work. And I think you hear from that plot, I mean, he's just getting completely lost in the woods with that, of just like, how are we going to explain that Hartnell doesn't look the same? And so Terrance Dicks comes along, and what he creates is essentially a structure into which you can pour as much of old Doctor Who as you can literally book within the shooting schedule. And if you look at the various drafts that this were made, obviously there was a draft originally with Tom Baker involved, and it was going to be Tom Baker paired with Sarah Jane, and the third Doctor would be with the Brigadier, and the second Doctor would be with Jamie. Tom Baker decides not to participate. Fraser Hines can't get the time off Emmerdale in order to film... Emmerdale Farm. Was it Emmerdale Farm in 83?
At the time.
Let's not get sidetracked. Fraser Hines can't get the time off in order to go and film as much as they would like. So he, but what he's created is a structure which means you could go, okay, well, the Brigadier will go with the second Doctor, then we'll put Sarah Jane with the third. We can use this old archive footage in. Oh, Fraser Hines is available for a day, so we'll put him in the scene with the ghosts.
Yeah.
We've got some time with, Richard Franklin and Caroline John. Very nice to see Caroline John. Liz Shaw get a turn in this. And what he creates,
blink and you'll miss her, but she's there.
It is, but it is also, what he's pulled off is to basically create a story that can accommodate all of that, but that also has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a quest, more or less. It's a very simple story, but it's a quest narrative. They're there. They all have to get to the tower. They all meet at the denouement. It's the first time you get all the Doctors together, and they vanquish the villain. So, as a piece of logistics, I really admire it.
They don't really, do they?
They don't really. Well, I think with it, right. A lot of it falls apart if you examine it too closely or with too critical eye, but I think it does enough, which is obviously what we're about to do.
Yes.
It completely, it's not fit for purpose for what we're about to subject it to. But,
I'll come back to that.
I think it strings together pretty well. I think also possibly its greatest trick is that it sort of convinces you that it's delivered on the promise of its title. It's called The Five Doctors. That means you're going to see the previous 4 Doctors. And actually, all you've got is 2 returning actors in Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee. You've got a bit of archive film representing Tom Baker, and you have a recast for you got Richard Hurndall playing the first Doctor instead of William Hartnell.
I mean,
we will come on to Richard Hurndall.
But to be fair to John Nathan Turner and Terence Dix, that would have been a less snappy title.
Yeah.
The three
Doctors, 1 recast, and some archive film, as I believe it's been dubbed at various points. That's not an original joke, but yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it is. But it's like, I don't think, and particularly because, like, you know, Tom Baker had only left the role 2 years earlier, right, and still looms large in the public imagination. Although it's also sort of easy to forget at the point where he was cast. Peter Davison was a massive star. He was, aside from John Pertwee, probably the person that had the biggest public profile in the classic series in terms of who he was.
All creatures great and small.
But you don't feel cheated by the fact that it's called The Five Doctors.
No. Okay.
Well, I didn't anyway.
Okay.
There's a lot more to talk about, and I think we can go through it piece by piece. But I'm going to pull back slightly there because you've been snarking all the way through my perhaps rather more fulsome praise of this. So tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, so something that really struck me. So look, obviously, as a Doctor Who fan, I have a great deal of affection for this.
Yes.
Right. So let's I often say when I'm talking about James Bond, for example, that like I think the best James Bond film is probably The Living Daylights.
Right.
I love License to Kill, From Russia with Love. If I want to stick on a James Bond film, they're probably not the ones I would stick on. It's going to be a Roger Moore Bond film every time. So there's often a kind of a gap, and this is very normal and completely fine. In fact, I was reading a review, I think in The Guardian, of the new Jilly Cooper adaptation, starring, of course, David Tennant. Rivals, I think it's on Disney Plus. There was a review in The Guardian by Lucy Mangan, but don't let that put you off. She wrote there was a line or two in that about escapism being a vital sort of safety valve, and we can often be rather snarky about escapism, and that has a big kind of role to play. So I will state my affection for the Five Doctors,
right?
But I found it a profoundly tough watch this time.
Really?
I wasn't beguiled by it anymore. Wow. And I can imagine at the time going, wow, yeah, I get to see John Pertwee again and Patrick Troughton. And I do think that getting Dix on board is a really bloody good shout because he has their voices down pat. Like,
absolutely.
He writes, he has them down pat, Troughton.
The second and third Doctors are just, and the combination of the writing and performance, it is a treat to see them swing back into action.
Yeah, I mean,
great balls of fire.
Yeah,
so, we're in.
He knows how to write for them, and they are not rusty in the role at all. Like, there's Troughton delivers some really great stuff here. Like when I'm not breaking the rules of time, but I am bending them a little.
Yeah.
And the way he says that is just, it's really sweet.
Yeah.
It's nice to see the Second Doctor and the Brigadier together because their dynamic is a bit different. And obviously, the Brigadier's sort of wistful. There are two. One time he says, "Splendid chaps, all of them," and then he says something similar near the end as well. And he's quite wistful about it and quite nostalgic in a way that I suppose the viewer is meant to be. So like there's stuff to like here.
Yeah.
But I feel that even though his solution of, well, we'll just recast is a lot more elegant than Robert Holmes trying to kind of puzzle box his way out of it.
Yeah.
You can't really get past the fact that this is 3 Doctors, a recast, and some archive footage.
Right.
And
you bump there. You don't give it the pass on that.
And especially because Richard Hurndall is simply miscast or not given the notes or just doesn't. He doesn't embody, like, one of the things.
Yeah, let's talk about Hurndall a bit, actually, because I've got quite a lot to.
One of the landmark things about, one of the kind of pillars of I'll Explain Later is the fact that we have really. When we started this journey, admittedly 9 years ago now, we started from a position of not really knowing much about the Heart and Leader. Maybe seen one or two stories. In your case, I'd seen none, and really realizing just how, this show that was broadcast, taped for showing in various other territories, but basically wasn't archived because nobody was really meant to watch it again, or certainly not again and again and again. The fact that it sustains. Not all of it, but a lot of it sustains being rewatched. Think about the war machines and AI and Google and everything we're seeing now with ChatGPT and all that, and LLMs and what have you. So much of it stands the test of time. So much of it does surprisingly stand this scrutiny that we put it under. The
Hartnell era more so than the Troughton era.
Indeed, I would agree. And I will come back to Hurndall, but one thing that really, really shocked me about watching this is that although it hits those nostalgic beats, it's so very much of this John Nathan Turner era of earlier 80s or early to mid 80s Doctor Who, where it simply doesn't bear the weight of any kind of analysis. Wow, isn't this prescient? Wow, doesn't this tell us something? Isn't it striking how this low budget show, with the limitations that it had, still manages to say something or do something or surprise us or, throw an intellectual curveball while it's also giving us green guild monsters. And we actually said this about not Blink, the other one we did recently.
Zygon Invasion.
Yeah. That I think we were talking about 80s Doctor Who not really touching the sides in
not
terms
really being
of
about anything.
Exactly. And how, Zygon Inversion, although I didn't feel it quite clicked, I appreciated the fact that it was trying to say something.
Yeah.
This is not trying to say anything, and that's very much in tune with the Doctor Who that John Nathan Turner seemed to be wanting to run at that time. It says nothing, and it doesn't have, there's not a science fiction element to it. There's not a societal point being made. There's no wider lens that's being brought to this. It's just what it is. And my point about escapism being fun aside, it doesn't bear any weight of scrutiny really, other than if you are a Doctor Who fan. And it's so obsessed about, you feel the dead hand of Ian Levine on this kind of thing. But coming back to Hurndall, one of the things that makes I'll Explain Later, or a pillar of our analysis, is that we want to say, my God, so much of what later became New Who is right there from the beginning, 63 to 66.
Yeah,
it bears that scrutiny. There's so much that's tied up in it, and also unlike the Moffat sort of characterization of the Doctor, the first Doctor, in the
David
second,
Bradley, Twice Upon a Time,
exactly, the second time he's been recast, where he's basically just shown as a kind of doddery old fuck with really, really out there racist and sexist views. That actually the Doctor, War Machine, I'll come back to that one. And the War Machines, he sides with the youth against the establishment. He is a more surprising character. He is a more astute character. Prickly, yes, occasionally wrong-headed, but interesting. And it kind of does just slide into doddery, smug fuck with Richard Hurndall. And
I'd agree with you on that. I mean, I think my major bum note on it is the disservice it does to the first Doctor. And I think it not only misrepresents the character in the way that, Moffat would all those years later in Twice Upon a Time, weirdly sets a precedent actually for the first Doctor being this sort of slightly malleable, it's the only Doctor that anyone has attempted to pass off on screen. I mean, Big Finish have recast, multiple classic series Doctors over the years and modern series Doctors actually. But, two different actors have come along to sort of play the
Big
first
Finish
Doctor.
These days is more or less a job creation scheme for Jacob Dudman, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Jacob, if you're listening, apologies. Love your work.
He's earning his money.
Yeah, no, he's definitely earning his money.
Big time.
I mean, he's a lot cheaper than Matt Smith, that's for sure.
It's... I think basically it's also worth remembering that the Hartnell era was very inaccessible for a long time, both in terms of, how little of it existed. Obviously, we're in an era. I mean, it is amazing that, you can dial up all of Doctor Who on iPlayer now and, watch it for free if you're in the UK and a license fee payer. The Hartnell era was sort of quite inaccessible for quite a long time. And I think in a way that... And it is interesting, like the Five Doctors, right? It was one of the first Doctor Who stories that I saw, and I think I would wager that for a lot of people who came to the classic series slightly later, that was also the case. I think
that if you're in WH Smith and you see all the VHSs lined up, which is sort of how we first got into it, the idea of getting 5 Doctors in one VHS is quite a compelling option.
It's a compelling package.
Yeah, you're going to... Well, especially when packaged with the King's Demons, as it was.
Yeah, it was in the 90s. But what also... I mean, it is quite a good onboarding point. I think as fans, sometimes we have this idea that, like, Joe Public will be confused by any sniff of continuity, and it needs to be excised from all of it, lest we alienate the straw man mainstream viewer. I think, to be honest, and especially in 1983, I think anyone approaching Doctor Who for the first time is at least going to be aware that there is a certain amount of lore. And if you take a random dip dive into any of the VHS archives or something, you're going to see fundamentally a bunch of different shows. So I think there is some... I can see whether or not it represents any of its eras particularly well, I'm not sure. But I think, fundamentally, I think if you want to get up to speed with like who the first 5 Doctors were, a smattering of the villains, it's a good crib sheet, essentially. But I think that combined with, the inaccessibility of the Hartnell era did a lot for many years to sort of marble this idea of like, the Hartnell era, essentially being sort of like, well, the show only hits its stride when it gets to Troughton or something like that. And I think it's that very one-note characterization. I mean, Herndl plays it on a spectrum of sort of doddery to sort of menacing but slightly unnecessary. Like his read of that line where, he's in the TARDIS with, I think it's Turlough, and he says, well, 2 of them made it. Or 3 of them made it.
I wonder what happened.
To the others. If you're expecting like a thunderclap line or something,
it's really strange.
It's a really weird delivery of the line.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest. I do sort of find myself thinking this was directed by Peter Moffat, whose other credits on the show I would not necessarily. Mordred Undead, The Visitation.
Yeah.
Twin Dilemma. Okay.
And famously a guy who for years was very much like, I don't understand a word of it, but I'll put a camera in front of it. That was always his thing. He's not...
I think this is leadenly directed. I think this is like... And things like that, I mean, he certainly put a camera in front of it and just said, whatever. Yeah. Like... what note was given to Herndl? I mean, I don't know whether to blame his limitations or the director's, but that is not the only bizarre. Famously, that is not the only bizarre line read. I mean, it's anybody listening to this probably doesn't need to hear anything about Paul Jericho's line reads as the Castellan.
Let's talk about the High Council of the Time Lords, right?
But
because
you've got
that scene where you got the 3 of them plus the Master.
Dinah Sheridan as Chancellor.
No one is giving a good line read in that.
No, Philip Latham, Dinah Sheridan, Paul Jericho,
and Anthony Ainley in that scene.
Yeah, and Anthony Ainley, but also the commander. He had a weapon and was trying to escape. Yeah. Like, the casting is dreadful. And if the casting isn't dreadful, then the direction is dreadful. But you are completely taken out of whatever suspension of disbelief is attempted by the will this do rep stylings of everybody involved with this.
None of those actors clearly have any sense what any of this means or what the stakes are.
And how can it be any other way? Because to be fair to them, I know that we're saying, well, you said, I didn't, that Terrence Dicks, sort of squared the circle, and perhaps to a certain extent he has. But the story makes no fucking sense at all whatsoever. There's no need for any of this to happen.
The gloves are coming off now.
But there's no need for any of this to happen. Like, Barusa could just waltz in. And, it seems extremely peculiar. He calls the Doctor in his various guises to solve the riddle of how to get in there, and then just transmats the fuck into the top of it at the end.
Yeah.
The
setting aside the idea that also by the time the fifth Doctor had this adventure, he's had it 4 times previously as well.
Well, yeah, but even if we do some kind of timey-wimey, because they never remember their interactions, do they? There's little bits to bump on, like, oh yes, well, I'm all teeth and curls. Yes, well, I'm not yet. They all seem to know. The Time Lords wiped your memories when you left me. That's right at the end of the second Doctor's life. So
yeah, he regenerates seconds later.
Neither from the continuity perspective, nor from the kind of general viewer, let's watch something.
We're not the first people to make this observation. It's worth pointing out.
I'm sure we're not, but it doesn't make any sense. And just trying to watch it sort of as a piece of television, and I've seen the nostalgia before, and just trying to watch it as a story, like. The sets are dreadful. You can see that the Cybermen gloves are just fucking cricket like gloves painted silver. Everything just feels so very will this do. The direct Peter Moffat, what's he thinking? Sarah Jane Smith basically falls when she's meant to trip down,
tumble down the tiny
tiny
incline.
It's not even the camera isn't even slightly tilted or done from a low angle so that you can't see that it's really just the same thing happens to Susan when she twists her ankle. By the way, you get one of them falling down a hill and the other one twisting their ankle. It's like the same beat hit again and again. The idea that you would use various iterations of the Doctor in order to figure out the puzzle, whatever that is, and to help him along, send in some of his mortal enemies who are trying to kill him, makes no bloody sense. And when you think about something like The Day of the Doctor, that obviously Stephen Moffat wrote, which we haven't reviewed it, but I'll say I think that's a very fine piece of work and knits together very well. Terrence Dicks has done 2 things well: the voice of the second Doctor and the interactions with the Brigadier, and the voice of the third Doctor and the interactions with Sarah Jane. Really, objectively, those are the only 2 things that are done well in this entire endeavour.
Wow.
That there's nothing else. Like the sets
not even Peter Howell's music.
Oh, I'll give you that. Yes, I'll give you Peter Howell's.
The music I wrote down, because often I find 80s Doctor Who music a very hit and miss affair.
Yeah.
But there's a certain and he samples all those notes from the Delia Derbyshire theme tunes to get that sort of dong 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 kind of sound and everything. I think Peter Howell's putting in a shift here.
I concede the point. So the voice of the second, the voice of the third Doctor, and Peter Howell's music. Other than that, what have the 5 Doctors ever done for us? And I like. Can
I raise you when Tegan and Turlough are dispatched to get some refreshments for the first Doctor, and they come back with seemingly like a plastic cocktail set up and a fruit salad?
Club Tropicana drinks are free. Yeah, it does feel a bit weird.
Amazing.
Like there's that sort of scooped out pineapple with shit in it. But also it also serves only because the second and the third Doctors have such a clear characterization, as do, by the way, the companions that they're linked with. All it does is once again throw into sharp relief just how absolutely blank canvas the sort of contemporary TARDIS crew are. I think Peter...
And even, let's say, maybe it's not a fair comparison because it was shot for a completely different production, but even the Sharda clip, where you got Tom Baker and Lala Ward, clearly, I think pretty maximally loved up at this point, on the punt and the...
Yeah, but even because it's Douglas Adams who wrote Sharda, right? So the little bit about, they think they're there in September, but it's October. And
May
she
weeks
says,
in
"Oh,
June.
how I love spring." And then she's cold. She's like, "Oh, how I love autumn." and May weeks in June. And it's so funny.
Yeah.
And
It's a great little vignette.
well, the problem is for the Five Doctors that's the best bit. Like, that's obviously in terms of the wide shot, the close up, the punting, the dynamism of what's seen. So you see there's a shot from the boat looking up at Tom Baker punting, which means they had a cameraman who got into the boat to shoot up. Then they did the wide with the mouth. The ambition of that.
Yeah.
And it's a really simple shot, which presumably doesn't add a great deal to the plot, but it adds a lot in terms of characterization. And it's so wittily written, and the performances are just so. It really throws into sharp relief how bad the rest of it is. I mean, the sets, the casting, the acting, the direction, none of it really works. And as I say, sorry, to come back to the TARDIS crew, Peter Davison's Doctor is as pale as his beige costume, right? There is nothing there.
Yeah.
Nothing there. And this isn't a criticism of Peter Davison, but the production was in a creative nadir in this era of the show. And Mark Strickson and Tegan.
Janet Fielding.
Yeah, Janet Fielding. Spirited people who give great convention and anecdote.
Very charismatic.
And whenever you see them, especially Janet Fielding and Peter Davison, whenever you see them doing like the
DVD extras.
Yeah, exactly. All that
they're a
stuff.
hoot.
They sizzle and they're scintillating.
Yeah.
And none of that in the whole era, by the way, but even here, none of that comes through on the screen. And the TARDIS crew, when you see the interactions between the third Doctor and Sarah Jane, or the second Doctor and the Brigadier, and then you see Tegan and Turlough, and the nothingness that they represent.
Yeah.
Both of them just being, I mean, literally both of them, there's a one line for their character, a bit tetchy.
Yeah.
I just don't understand. And so the fulcrum of this celebration, when the fifth Doctor says, "Oh, I'm being hollowed out," you're damn right. I mean, that's what's happened to the show. The whole show's been hollowed out.
Well, and it's interesting that it comes at a bit of an inflection point for the show where, like, the 20th anniversary season of which this comes at the end. So season 20, there was the sort of running idea was that each story would bring back an element of the Doctor's past. So you got the Black Guardian trilogy, you've got a return from the Mara in Snake Dance. Every of the Brigadier comes back in Mordrin Undead. All of the stories are doing something with that. And that's a real break from, I mean, I don't much care for the first two John Nathan Turner stories, but that more sort of Christopher Bidmead sort of like, there is at least an idea that like the stories there are about kind of entropy and, there's some sort of hard science fiction.
I'll say there's some entropy on screen. I'll give you that.
There's some concepts kind of underrunning. And it's, the season 20 went down quite well. The Five Doctors was very well received. And that really, they decided to lean into that much more the following year in terms of like, you got Return of the Daleks, you get the Return of the Sea Devils, there's a lot more, the Master comes back again. That sort of, this definitely is where the crystallizing of that issue that I have with 80s Doctor Who, that it just becomes about Doctor Who doing Doctor Who-y things rather than being about anything. Like, that barrel is really picking up speed coming down the hill now. It's
Absolutely.
like this idea that the show becomes fundamentally inward looking. And I suppose the issue is, I managed to find a scan online. There was a very I think a very sort of witty review of this written by Dave Owen for a Doctor Who magazine special edition in the early 2000s, where he essentially sort of points out that none of this makes a lick of sense, but sort of expresses a degree of affection for it, and that it's a funny piece. I'll try and put a link to it in the show notes if I can dig it out again. But he does.
He won't remember, listeners. He won't remember.
But he does. He finishes the point on like the fact that given that Doctor Who had already leaned into nostalgia hard for a year by this point, this wasn't seeing the anniversary get together. this wasn't the phrase he uses is not so much as a special as a typical. Like it's sort of like we might touch on this later at the back end of the show. You know, some of the sort of grousing about whether or not the 60th anniversary episodes constituted proper anniversary episodes of Doctor Who.
I have developed views on that.
I have developed views on that. Well, I don't. But save that for a minute. We can save that for after the clip. But the one thing I would say is that in recent years, particularly after The Power of the Doctor, Tales from the TARDIS, you know, various other bits and pieces, it doesn't. The idea that in 2023 we needed to see Peter Davison put on the Fifth Doctor costume again in a modern production is sort of like, well, it seemed to do that quite a lot, actually.
Quite apart from anything else. I mean, it's uncanny how, you know, very famously there's that footage of Chris Chibnall in the 80s criticising that era of Doctor Who. Yeah. Like, and then, of course, he gets the opportunity almost sort of 35 years later to actually run the show, and seems to me to make almost exactly the same mistakes and recreates many of those situations. Indeed, even going so far as to be very nostalgic about some of those 80s characters and you know, Tegan and Ace and even God, the other one. The one that...
It's just Tegan and Ace in the back. Oh, Mel.
Mel's in the Chibbers.
Briefly at the end.
So, you know, I often feel that a lot of the people who are sort of, again, they got what the people who say they wanted that got what they wanted with Chibbers last
a year earlier. Yeah.
And did that really satisfy anybody? And then they complain they didn't get it later on. I think, though, that coming back to the Five Doctors, it's sort of that thing of, oh yeah, you want a Dalek. Oh yeah, you want a Cyberman. But what I think makes Doctor Who special to somebody looking back on it over the 60-year periods is what makes a story special from 40 or 50 or 60 years ago is looking back and going, wow, there's something in there that still speaks to me. There's nothing here. And that's very, very much of this era of Doctor Who. There's nothing here that's trying to speak to anybody. It is what it is. It is eating itself, and it is eating itself with ever lower production values. And you get an occasional spike, like maybe what's the 17th century one? Is it the Visitation?
Visitation, yeah.
Where there's a rare confluence of that seems to hold together, but that it just seems to become ever more involved with itself as the production values fall. And I think you can point to other, again, various people's mileage will vary, but you can point to, for example, seasons 5 and season 6, season 7, or basically the Matt Smith era of the New Who, where the focus on Doctor Who sort of turning in on itself and trying to cannibalize its own mythology. I feel the show is most successful when it's looking outwards. And so perhaps having endured, to my mind, some of that Moffat stuff and some of that later Chibnall stuff, perhaps I'm even less inclined to give the Five Doctors the benefit of the doubt.
I want to broaden this out a bit.
Okay.
And I want to talk about anniversaries in general. So one of the other things that I think sort of stood out to me for the first time thinking about the Five Doctors, rewatching it for this, is actually kind of, it's the only time the series, full stop, attempts to do this, by which I mean the take the phone off the hook, stop everything, we're just going balls out and doing anniversary nostalgia.
Yeah.
So 10th anniversary, you get the 3 Doctors, which obviously return for Patrick Troughton and a small cameo from Hartnell himself.
I've still never seen it.
But it's the opening story of the 10th anniversary season. It introduces a bunch of new elements. You've got the gel guards. You've got, our first proper look outside of, the end of the war games at the Doctor's home planet, as yet unnamed. And it ends with the Doctor's exile being lifted. And so, it's doing an anniversary thing, but it's playing a role in the ongoing story. Like it impacts on every story that follows. And the Doctor's free to explore space and time. Nominally Silver Nemesis is the 25th anniversary story. That is just basically a Doctor Who story. It brings back the Cybermen.
It's not nominally. I mean, it's called Silver.
It's called Silver Nemesis,
right?
And I think the point when they were making it was that they, and they do so clumsily. We'll talk about Silver Nemesis in the fullness of time. But the idea was, we'll bring back the Cybermen who are silver. We'll do a thing about, a 25-year time jump, and also we'll reassert the mystery of the Doctor. So the whole thing about that is, they really take a push forward on sort of establishing this idea that the seventh Doctor might not be who we think he is, that he had some role in the backstory of the Time Lords. Anyway, that side. Dimensions in Time is a skit. The Day of the Doctor, I think, is doing a very similar thing to the Three Doctors in that it is like it's adding new elements to the story, and it's there to essentially wrap up the Time War story and reintroduce a sort of slight quest narrative for Gallifrey that the Peter Capaldi Doctor sort of takes up on, gives us a new Doctor in the form of John Hurt. It's not attempting to be a kind of like, let's throw everything into this at once.
I was really actually hoping after Day of the Doctor that it was going to be a bit more of a kind of key to time sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's more they could have done with it, to be honest.
Where basically there is a standalone adventure, but each standalone adventure somehow gives you another glimpse or a clue, or it builds towards something. Whereas
definitely at the end of it, it's like there's the hint of an ongoing story. I mean, literally the Five Doctors ends with, so you're choosing to go on the run from your own people in a rackety old TARDIS. Why not? After all, that's how it all started. Whereas like the Three Doctors and Day of the Doctor are at least setting up something like either you're free now or your home planet's still out there and you might find it one day.
Yeah.
And then obviously the 60th anniversary stories, which, yes, grousing from some quarters as to whether or not they represent proper anniversary stories. But actually, I think you put this point most elegantly to me in a private conversation that I'm now making public on YouTube. And on
You'll be hearing from my lawyer.
Where you said that it's the equivalent of if to mark the 30th anniversary in 1993, they'd commissioned a limited run of stories to go out on TV with a massive budget starring Tom Baker and
Liz Sladen.
And we'd have been absolutely thrilled with that.
Yeah,
so it's
everyone would have their kidneys would have been in their mouths. They would have just been amazing. Like everyone would have been like,
so the anniversary salute factor is bringing back the big guy, and then at the end, obviously setting up the new era.
I mean,
as well.
it is not a given that one of the hottest TV actors of the era would want to come back to the genre role that made their name.
Yeah,
David Tennant rolls up his sleeves and goes, do you know what? I'm there, and I'm there for, and the grousing, the complaining, they should have done this, they should have done that. I don't care if they have to use a forklift truck to get Colin Baker in there. They need him. I don't want to hear another word.
Yeah,
because you take basically the person that most people, gun to the head, would say that's the Doctor.
Yeah,
like Tennant is the Tom Baker de nos jours.
He absolutely is. Yeah.
And the idea that it is insufficiently celebratory to have not only David Tennant, who is a bigger star than Tom Baker was, in terms of going on to great things and top billing and managing to have genre and television.
Yeah, he's an international star.
Yeah, I mean, not quite, film star, like sort of, lead man film star blockbuster, but he's a big fucking name. He's the UK's biggest TV actor.
Yeah.
And the idea that it's insufficiently celebratory that this guy will come back and do those three with, by the way, Catherine fucking Tate, who is
And on a gussied up Disney budget.
yeah, and that's not special enough.
Yeah.
By the way, it's insufficiently a love in with the fans to checks notes remake a
We got
a 70s comic.
Beat the Meep.
I mean, it's just it's 70s, right?
Yeah.
But like, I don't know what planet these people are on. And I sat watching. Sorry, I forget the name of the correspondent who wrote in saying
This is the kind of fighting talk that we need now that we've made the move to YouTube. I'm expecting, please fill the comments below.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
No, leave us some angry messages.
No, seriously, like and subscribe.
Do that first.
But the there was a correspondent who got in touch with us, a very, very kind gentleman. It was a gentleman who said, bless him, who said, I'd really like you to take a look at this thoughtful review of the 60th. And basically, it was one of those kind of, God, it's just these YouTube talking heads.
Yeah.
One of the basically a recorded
This
Zoom.
thin ice, John, is
A recorded
creaking.
Zoom
your
call
feet.
with a kind of celebrity squares kind of fucking thing going on with one of them, dressed up as various Doctor Who characters. Some dressed up, some not, but all of them with the same sort of sourpuss expression of, well, Russell T Davies just doesn't love the fans anymore, and I'm just like, he came back to save the show. You might not like some of the stuff that he says on his socials, but you know what? That's not actually the program. You can just not.
Might not like all of the program the following year.
No, but that's what I'm saying is, like,
that's in the future. At that
I
point.
tried to watch sort of 20 minutes of this 90-minute diatribe between these six people about the 60th, and
the thin ice is basically cracking.
No, I'm swimming in ice cold water next to some narwhals, but there's honestly, they're saying like
3 episodes in and we're starting to fight in the Doctor Who.
Sorry, can I just?
Economy.
No. They're spending.
I agree.
They spent I watched the first 20 minutes of this, and they spent 18.5 minutes of this criticizing the way that Russell T Davies was interacting with fandom. Now, I may or may not find his social media posts annoying, a bit lovey, weird, antagonistic, clearly drunken. I'm just joking, lawyers, or whatever, any of the above. But do you know what?
What?
You could just choose not to read that fucking stuff. You could choose to not engage with it. You could choose to just watch the program. And I
knew raising this issue would be a red rag. I do want to pull this back to
people's
the 5 Doctors.
Inability to see whether they liked them or not.
Yeah.
To see that the effort that went into the 60th in terms of, like, I mean, I come back to what you said.
To be fair, the biggest gift of the 60th was all of the show uploaded onto iPlayer for free to watch. I mean, what a gift!
And Tales from the TARDIS, and a remake of a filmed version of a 70s
and
classic,
the Daleks in colour.
a 70s classic comic, plus the most popular Doctor of all time with his best companion. I mean, everyone who thinks that this was insufficiently celebratory, you guys got what you wanted with Chris Chibnall the previous year, and it was shit. Right? So can you just wind your fucking neck in?
But to my point, and we're not even reviewing the 60s, the specials in this one. But to my point,
I haven't said whether I liked it or not.
No, true, good point. That's extremely fair. That's extremely fair point.
NB, I did.
Yeah,
or at least most of it.
It would have been a hell of a twist if you hadn't. But to my point, the 5 Doctors.
Yeah, what is your point?
I don't know. It's been so long since I started.
I'm really getting into this YouTube thing. This is really great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what is your point, Matt?
Smash that red thumbs down button right now. No, I suppose to my point is just that the 5 Doctors is the only time the series attempts to do a big reunion special. I will get as many people as possible. And yet that has sort of marbled the expectations for what the anniversary special should be.
Yes.
even though it only ever happens once.
Once.
And to be fair, on the basis, I stand by the fact that I enjoyed it on this watch through, but I can't. I'm not going to.
I stand by the fact.
I'm not going to fault any of your.
I stand by the
critiques
fact that you enjoyed it as well, but I didn't. I hated it this time round.
Okay.
I really found it a tough watch. And like I say, I think I'm probably coloured by a lot of. I'm slightly triggered by this whole anniversary thing that we've endured over the last year, maybe, and the discourse around it. So I can't say that maybe I'm not bringing some of that to the table, but the production shortcomings and the shortcomings of the era came through a lot more for me. But Matt,
well, this is a cheerful note to round out the 60th.
But what I wanted
it?
to say was. Is there anything from the 60th anniversary that you would have liked to see? Is there something extra? Is there one thing? Was there one of the rumours or something that somebody had suggested where you went, oh yeah, that actually would have been quite good? Is there anything that you can think of that would have been?
I would have liked to have seen an unearthly child included in the. I would have liked that in Grinch of something of a bigot. I think it'd be fair to say to sign the deal and get everything there. No, I suppose, and I suppose what the 60th anniversary did for me, or sort of the triumph of it, was that it actually.
So you did like it.
I did. Well, no, but the 60th in terms of everything that came together as part of that celebration as a package, was that it really was tying all of Doctor Who together as a bow and saying, have all of it. Do you know what I mean? And in a way that felt, when the series was brought back in 2005, there was so classic series stuff had to have a different logo. There were no references to the old series in the new series apart from, the TARDIS and the Daleks. It was very much like we need to keep these things at arm's length. Lest the new people were trying to get scared off by this weird old crap for anoraks that's been hanging around on DVD. And now there's very much. I think that's a sign in which how Doctor Who has re-embedded itself into the public imagination, if not always the public affection in the intervening years, but also how our sort of media literacy about how we watch sci-fi means that we can take and expect a certain amount of lore now. You don't expect people don't come to something cold and then be surprised by the fact that there might have been some stuff they might not have seen. And so I think actually, as part of that, and as part of there's risks attached to that as well, by the way, of being too nostalgic. But I actually think as part of saying right, here's 3 new specials with the most popular Doctor, and then here is all of Doctor Who for free, while it's still being released on expensive Blu-rays as well. If you want the deluxe version, I really thought that was I genuinely struggled to think of a better way you could have celebrated the anniversary.
I completely agree. I think it was all incredibly fitting and very joyful.
You also want me to say, why didn't they bring back the axon? I really needed the axons.
Yeah,
that's the kind of take
I did.
I
was looking for you to say something dumb like that. No, but I want to come back to what you were saying.
I flannelled with quite a sincere point.
No, and I'm glad you did, actually, because I heartily agree with you. I really do. Look, for the record, I also find much of Russell T Davis's social media stuff annoying. But what I've done, I can recommend this to people.
I'm not sure if I follow him on social.
Yeah, I just choose not to engage anymore with it. That's an option, people.
And if you take one thing away from the 60th as the final hours tick away in the anniversary year, let it be that.
But I want to come back to something you said about how, when they brought back the show in 2005, it was very much verboten to talk about or to reference the previous thing. That not only speaks to greater confidence that Doctor Who is properly now embedded as a permanent part of the cast. I mean, I think that people speak about Doctor Who in these days as sort of up there with James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, and Doctor Who, the Doctor. I don't think that was quite true in 2005.
No.
And I think it is true now. Yeah. So the relaunch of the show has been successful in just cementing that position of Doctor Who in that kind of god tier firmament of British pop cultural icons. But beyond that, the Whoniverse and the presence of all of that Doctor Who stuff on iPlayer here in the UK speaks as well, I think, to the wider media literacy of people these days. Like the approach where, because everything is on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, wherever you're catching your music. I mean, you literally have 18-year-olds wandering around wearing Nirvana and Pearl Jam t-shirts.
Yeah, no one's going to be freaked out by the idea of what this was from 1978.
Yeah, like, and
insane.
Don't get me wrong. I think television ages. Like it's a lot more accessible for people to get into older music than it is to get into older television. But it doesn't freak people out, and young people today in particular are much more comfortable, and I think this is very much to their credit in general, with the idea that there are useful cultural things to explore from the past.
Yeah.
And so it was, I think that it was probably easier for Russell T Davies and whoever it was who were really fighting for this to be the case, to make that argument and have it land in a media landscape where, that kind of 2 from the top and 3 from the bottom, please, Carol, countdown approach to culture is more embedded in amongst the youth, the Das Ute of today.
Well, there you go. We found a positive point to round this slightly more negative anniversary special than maybe we were expecting.
Well, you were very positive. It's just me that was negative.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Don't listen to me. I had a hard day at work.
Come dab it to you. Well, the 60th anniversary year is drawing to a close, but I'll explain later. Goes on. We'll be back next week with another episode.
Yes, we're looking at.
We're looking at. I can never work out whether this is a format point where we should preview. We're going to be looking at the Daemons next week, so we're going on to another
Demons,
another big one from 1971.
I mean, even within, we will cover this, but even within it, they can't decide how to pronounce it.
Yeah, John, this episode's over already. Don't start previewing next week.
All right, okay. But if you have any thoughts, if you've been affected by any of the issues raised, then leave a comment below.
Leave us a comment below.
Like and
if
subscribe.
You're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Absolutely. Don't forget to subscribe to the I'll Explain Later YouTube channel, not the official Doctor Who YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
Subscribe to them both.
Don't forget to subscribe. I'll have your balls.
We should record a few of those.
Yes.
Follow us on Blue Sky. I'll Explain Later. Twitter and Instagram.
I'll Explain Later.
Explain Later Pod. Send us an email. Hello, I'll Explain Later.
I'll Explain Later.
And we will be back next week. Have a good one.
Take care.